Think about the last time you had to do something small but painfully boring. Maybe it was folding laundry, answering a backlog of emails, filling out forms, or cleaning up after dinner when you just wanted to lie down. The task itself wasn't hard, but inside it felt heavier than it should. Your body resisted, your mind drifted, and minutes stretched into what felt like hours. You weren't exhausted because of the task itself. You were exhausted by the way you were paying attention to it. And that's the hidden truth. Most boring tasks aren't really boring. What drains us is the way we frame them, the way our attention lands on them. When you understand that, you realize you don't need more discipline or motivation. You need a shift in how you direct attention. And today, I'm going to show you one simple mental shift that makes boring things surprisingly easy to handle. Let's pause for a second. Why do boring tasks feel so heavy? It's not because they're complex. Most of them are simple. It's because they lack immediate reward. Your brain, designed to prioritize survival, lights up for novelty, challenge, or clear payoff. But when you face something repetitive or dull, your dopamine system doesn't get that spark. So the brain interprets it as low value, low urgency, not worth doing right now. That's why scrolling social media feels effortless while answering 3 short emails feels unbearable. It's not willpower, it's biology. And if biology is the problem, then biology is also the solution. Because the truth is, you can flip the brain's script on boredom, not by fighting it, but by changing what your attention is doing in the moment. Here's the model I want you to hold in mind. Imagine a triangle with 3 sides: resistance, focus, and reward. When you approach a boring task, resistance is high, focus is scattered, and reward feels absent. Your goal isn't to bulldoze resistance with sheer willpower. It's to rewire attention so that reward shows up in the present moment. And when that happens, resistance drops almost automatically. So how do you do that? Here comes the trick. The shift is this. Instead of seeing the task as one big, gray, endless thing, zoom into the smallest possible action, and then layer attention on the sensory detail of that action. For example, let's say you have to wash a sink full of dishes. Normally, your mind screams, "Ugh, this is going to take forever, I don't want to." That's resistance. But if you zoom in and place attention on just one dish, and then even more specifically on the sensation of warm water on your hands, or the shine as the plate becomes clean, suddenly the task is no longer a gray block of effort. It's a series of small sensory experiences. You've transformed the boring into something immediate, concrete, and oddly satisfying. This might sound small, almost too small, but it's exactly what rewires the brain's response. Because here's the science. Attention and reward are deeply connected. When you narrow attention to the sensory level, touch, sight, sound, you activate neural circuits that signal presence. Presence itself becomes a reward loop, producing dopamine not at the end of the task, but during it. That's why focusing on one glass while you wash it feels lighter than thinking about the whole pile. The task hasn't changed, you have. And here's where most people go wrong. They think the solution to boring work is distraction, listening to music, podcasts, or background noise. And yes, that can help, but it often pulls attention away instead of reshaping it. The real upgrade is to stay with the task, but to change the frame. Not, "I have to finish this mountain, but I'm curious about this one step." That curiosity is what turns obligation into flow. Let me give you another example. Imagine you've been procrastinating on answering a work email. The whole thing feels heavy, so you keep avoiding it. But instead of forcing yourself to just do it, try zooming in. Open the draft and focus only on writing the greeting. "Hi, Alex." Nothing else. That's the zoom. Now, notice the feel of your fingers on the keyboard or the click of the keys. When you shrink the task into this micro-action and add sensory attention, resistance suddenly melts. Before you know it, the first line is written and momentum carries you forward. This is the mental trick. Shift from macro resistance to micro attention. You're not making the task shorter, you're making your experience of it lighter. And because the brain loves completion, each tiny step gives you a drip of reward. That drip is enough to keep you going. Now let's go deeper. Why does this work? Psychologists call this the attention-reward loop. When you pay attention to a small sensory detail, the brain registers progress. Progress releases dopamine. Dopamine fuels motivation. Motivation sustains attention. And attention keeps progress moving. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. Most people never enter that cycle because they're staring at the mountain instead of the first stone. But if you know how to direct attention, you can start the loop at any moment. Here's a simple way to practice it. The next time you face a boring task, ask yourself, what is the smallest unit of action here? Washing one spoon, writing one sentence, folding one shirt, Then shift your focus to a sensory detail of that action. The texture, the sound, the sight. Stay there for just a moment. You'll feel resistance drop almost instantly. And once you've done one unit, the brain wants to continue. Momentum has begun. I know what you might be thinking. That sounds too simple to work. But here's the paradox. Simple is exactly why it works. Your brain doesn't need a grand system to get started. It needs a doorway. And the doorway is always smaller than you think. Let me share a metaphor. Imagine pushing a stalled car. If you try to move the whole thing at once, it feels impossible. But if you get it to budge just a few inches, momentum helps carry it forward. That first inch is the hardest, but also the most important. Boring tasks work the same way. The first inch is zooming in, shifting attention to one sensory step. Once you're moving, the weight disappears. Now, let's tie this back to the triangle. Resistance, focus, reward. By zooming in, you shrink resistance. By noticing sensory detail, you sharpen focus. And by experiencing progress in microsteps, you generate reward. That's the whole system in one move. It's not willpower, it's alignment. So here's what I want you to take away. You don't need to fight boring tasks anymore. You don't need to shame yourself for procrastinating or push harder with brute force. All you need is to flip the switch of attention. Shrink the task, zoom in, and let your senses turn the mundane into flow. Once you try it, you'll see how even the dullest chores become lighter, faster, and strangely satisfying. And here's the most powerful part. This shift doesn't just help with dishes or emails. It applies everywhere: studying, exercising, preparing reports, decluttering your home. Any area where resistance shows up, the same trick unlocks flow. One shift of attention and what felt impossible suddenly becomes easy. Now, let's connect this shift to the bigger picture of your life. Because the truth is, boring tasks aren't just about chores or paperwork. They're about identity. Every time you procrastinate on something small, you're not just delaying action. You're reinforcing a story about yourself. I'm someone who avoids. I'm someone who can't handle routine. I'm someone who struggles with consistency. That story becomes heavy. But when you use this trick, zoom in, focus on the sensory detail, generate micro reward, you flip the story. You become someone who can, someone who shows up, someone who finishes what they start without needing a massive push. That's not just about productivity, that's about self-respect. Think of it this way. Life is mostly made of small, repetitive actions. Brushing your teeth, preparing food, cleaning your space, answering messages, managing responsibilities. If you hate or resist those moments, you're hating and resisting most of your life. But if you can find a way to make them lighter, easier, even mildly enjoyable, then you've transformed the foundation of your days. You no longer wait for big, exciting moments to feel good. You start to feel good inside the ordinary. And that's freedom. Here's another layer. When you zoom in on a sensory detail, you're not just reducing resistance, you're training mindfulness. Mindfulness isn't about sitting in silence for an hour. It's about noticing what's here, now, without judgment. When you practice it during boring tasks, you sneak meditation into everyday life. Washing dishes becomes a meditation. Folding laundry becomes a meditation. Answering emails becomes a meditation. And the payoff is enormous. Less stress, more calm, sharper focus. So what began as a hack for productivity becomes a deeper upgrade for your entire nervous system. But let's bring it back to something practical, something you can use right now. Pick one task you've been putting off. Maybe it's tidying your desk. Maybe it's answering a message. Maybe it's organizing a folder on your computer. Don't think about the whole thing. Ask yourself, what's the smallest unit of action? Maybe it's putting one paper in the bin. Maybe it's typing one word. Do that. As you do it, notice one sensory detail: the sound of the paper crumpling, the click of the keys, the sight of the cleared space. Stay with that. Feel the shift inside you, the resistance softening, the weight lifting. And then, without force, move to the next micro step. That's it. That's the doorway. Now imagine multiplying this across your week. Instead of dragging your feet on dozens of small obligations, you glide through them, one by one, lighter, faster, calmer. What would that do to your energy, to your confidence, to the way you see yourself? Because here's the deeper truth. Boring tasks aren't punishment, they're practice. They're practice in how you handle resistance, practice in how you direct attention, practice in how you relate to your own life. And every time you choose the micro-focus shift, you practice being someone who can handle anything with ease. You might wonder, will this work for the biggest, most draining projects? The answer is yes, because even the largest mountain is climbed step by step. The trick doesn't change. You just keep shrinking the next step until it feels light. Write one sentence, answer one question, clear one corner. Each time you zoom in, you unlock momentum, and momentum is stronger than motivation. Motivation comes and goes. Momentum builds and carries you forward. There's also a hidden benefit here. When you change your relationship to boring tasks, you stop wasting energy fighting them. That energy is freed up for creativity, relationships, rest, and growth. You no longer arrive at the end of the day exhausted from invisible battles. You arrive with more presence and capacity. That shift compounds over weeks and months, and suddenly you find yourself not just more productive, but more alive. Let's close with this thought. Every boring task is an invitation. An invitation to train your mind, to master your attention, to discover that lightness is always one shift away. You don't need to wait for inspiration. You don't need to punish yourself with willpower. You just need to remember, zoom in, sense, reward. That's the triangle, that's the trick. That's the upgrade. So tonight, choose one small task you've been avoiding. Instead of dreading it, try this. Shrink it, zoom in, focus on one sensory detail. Let yourself feel the micro reward. Then notice how easily the next step comes. Do this once and you'll see the power. Do it often and you'll transform not just your productivity, but your entire relationship to daily life. Because in the end, the difference between a heavy life and a light one isn't in the tasks, it's in the way you see them. Change your attention and the weight disappears. That's how you make any boring task easy. That's how you reclaim your energy, your time, and your freedom. And that's how you step into the version of yourself who doesn't just survive the day, but moves through it with clarity, ease, and flow.